Hello, I'm Maggie Burnett Stogner, Executive Director of the Center for Environmental Filmmaking at American University in Washington, D.C. And it's my great pleasure to have the opportunity to interview the Rue Mahoney from the Sea of Shadows, one of the candidates for the Impact Campaign Media Awards for Jackson Wild 2020. And so hello, Rue, this is such a pleasure. And wow, congratulations on Sea of Shadows. It's a powerful, powerful film.
Oh, thank you.
So energetic, so dynamic. And I was fascinated to read the impact campaign materials and the thinking that went into it. So we're gonna break that down for people in this case study. So let me just dive in on the film itself and at what point the idea of having an impact campaign came into play.
Sure.
So let's start there.
I think one of the things that made this project special, and one of the reasons that I think the campaign has done as well as it has, is that the production team behind this actually thought about impact from pre-production, and that's something as an impact producer that I would love to see more filmmakers do. I think oftentimes you would find that, you know, even if you don't have budget quite yet for an impact producer, you're not sure that you will even have budget. I think that, you know, most impact producers like myself are very open to having conversations. And I think that the earlier you can start thinking about, you know, what outcomes, what do you want this film to achieve in the world, the better work that impact producers can do for you. And I think that Sea of Shadows is a great example of where having thought about impact from the beginning became central to some of the film narratives and the way the story unfolded.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I just, this summer, I've been doing a lot of research for Impact Media Report funded by HHMI Tango Bank Studios. And
Amazing.
we were looking at kind of a holistic approach to impact, one that does start at the very inception of the project and then includes the creative decisions, the collaboration and alliances that are built, and the outreach strategies. So I'd like to hear just, you know, your thoughts on each of those kind of areas, because it seems like if you can think about them as a whole, they can have so much, a greater impact, greater influence.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think so often we're handed stories that have already been filmed and people say, what can you do? And sometimes the thing that they want to achieve is actually slightly, just, it may even just be a little bit, sometimes what you want to achieve, or even like what your investors or your funders or your NGO partners hope to achieve with the film doesn't 100% dovetail with the narrative that you've actually followed, with the story that you've created. And that doesn't mean that there's anything intrinsically wrong with the story. I think oftentimes conversations about impact leave people with the feeling that it's not about entertainment anymore, that your film has to do a job. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that, like, it has to be entertaining or no one's going to be interested in anything that I'm doing with a campaign. And so good story is absolutely still at the heart of, I think, what leads to good impact. But I do think that, you know, thinking about impact as a strategy and not a campaign, if you think about a campaign as one slice of a larger impact strategy, I think there's so much more that you can do, you know, with your funding, with your project, and this certainly has been an instance where I think that was really fruitful, because sometimes there's that misalignment between story and outcome, and it can be incredibly subtle tweaks that help make the connection for the audience.
So part of the challenge, I think, for a lot of filmmakers is how to have that shared vision, how to think strategically, as you said, and then how to bring everybody together around a shared vision. So I'm curious if you could take us back to maybe one of those early conversations you had and share with us, you know, how that vision came together and what that vision
Sure.
ended up being.
Yeah. I mean, I won't lie. Obviously, sometimes that's difficult. And there are directors who are like, yeah, great, impact campaign. Don't talk to me. I have a film to make. And then there are other directors, and Richard Ledcani is a great example of this, who are really invested in wanting their film to do good work in the world. And consequently, I think the impact producer just becomes like any of the other producers that you have on the film. You're deeply engaged in kind of early conversations about where the story might go. I think one of the smart things that happened, and I certainly can't take credit for this, but I think that one of the smart things the production team did with Sea of Shadows was that, you know, even though we sort of knew what we were aiming to do with the film, which was we want to save the Vaquita, that could have gone a lot of ways. And we knew that in the beginning. We knew that, you know, we were going off to Mexico. It's one of the murkiest areas where you can't really see under the water very well. We didn't even know if we'd get footage of a vaquita to see. We didn't know if the science expedition to bring them into captivity would be successful. I mean, obviously, very sadly, it was not, and that becomes an emotional climax of the film. One of the smart things that they did in the beginning, and all of us were sort of, you know, bringing our unique kind of perspective to this, was that Richard really led everyone in sort of mapping out what are the different ways in which this story might go. We obviously had the one we wanted to happen, which was the vaquita is successfully brought into captivity. There's a breeding program. Film ends with adorable baby vaquita is the hope for the future population. That didn't happen. And what we did in advance is we sort of recognized that this is real life and we don't know where the story is going to go. What are all the ways it could happen? And then we worked backwards and we said, okay, on a production side, what are all the shots that we have to get to tell that story if that ends up being the narrative that we have to follow? But I also had the opportunity to do that on an impact side, and that became incredibly valuable because that's what happened. We ended up going down a route with the story that would not have been our first choice. And so from an impact standpoint, because I was engaged in the conversation so early, and was involved in production and, you know, on location as a field producer, because we were already thinking as a team about what are those different end goals where we might end up and how does that translate to what we might be able to ask the public to think about and to do, I was able to start building up relationships that were conducive to any of those channels that we may have ended up down with the narrative. And so by the time we got to the end of filming and we knew, okay, well, this is the trajectory that we're going to be on, it really empowered me as an impact producer to already have built kind of the scaffolding upon which the campaign was going to be built. And, you know, rather than just becoming a happy, you know, save the vaquita story, we ended up having to do something much more complex, you know, with the campaign, which was to actually help people understand that the solutions to conservation crises are oftentimes not conservation based. They're oftentimes, you know, have to do with government policy or socioeconomics or political instability, and that you can't solve a conservation crisis without also addressing those key issues. And so I think if we had not been thinking about that from the very beginning, I think my job as an impact producer would have been substantially more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, one of the very impressive campaign kind of structuring that you did that's so multi-layered, and to bring in that message of conservation isn't in a vacuum. It has to be part of the community. It has to be looked at through policy, through socioeconomic, and that you thought about that and how to unpack that for viewers early on is really impressive. I don't think I've ever seen an impact campaign that's so multi-layered, and the idea of mapping out all the different story possibilities beforehand and looking at where does that take us, not just in terms of the creative decision-making of the film, but also where are the opportunities then for adding in more layers of impact is really very successful. I mean, Sea of Shadows is an excellent model for this.
Thank you.
You have several clips that I would love for you to share and talk about that help illustrate some of the different areas of impact. So let's go to that next.
Sure. You know, actually, you know, what you just said, Maggie, I think was so important. And it was the idea of mapping out the different avenues for impact and the way that we were able to kind of utilize the production period, which traditionally some people are not thinking about impact as being relevant then, but because we were thinking this way, and Terremotor was, you know, a great partner, Richard was a great partner on this, we were able to kind of plan ahead for some of that. And, you know, one of the key things that came out of this was that I think it would have been very easy for this story to have landed on some very cliche sort of tropes, which is you have bad brown poachers who are being, you know, combating white scientists who are coming in to save the day, right? And we all knew from the beginning, like, that is not the story that we want to tell. It's not reflective of reality. But how do we make sure that we're setting ourselves up not only as a film and a narrative, but also as a campaign to challenge those stereotypes and to do something different? And one of the things that I was tasked with as a field producer together was probably probably the biggest challenge that I've had ever, as a field producer ever, and led to some of my most tense personal moments on location, which was to find an illegal poacher who was willing to speak on camera anonymously about why he was engaged in the activities that he was engaged in. And to be quite honest, this initial meeting, which the meeting between myself and this person happened obviously, prior to us filming, but it ended up really fundamentally shifting the way that I thought about the entire campaign. In the film, you meet a character named JT, obviously a pseudonym, whose image is blurred out, and you see that this man is not living in wealth, right? We think of poachers as like, oh, they're in it for the money, they're making loads of money. The thing that I think stuck with me is when I met this character first, it was a local fixer who helped make the connection. And it was really nerve-wracking for me. Exactly what every father tells their college-age daughter not to do, which is to not get into a car with strange men that you don't know, which is exactly what happened. I had to put a tremendous amount of faith in my fixer that this was the right conversation to have and where to have it. I was really incredibly nervous about meeting this person who I knew was, a middleman working with Sinaloa cartel, and I got put into the back seat of a car and taken someplace to chat. But that experience actually became foundational to where the impact campaign went. And as a field producer, part of your job is to ensure that your crew are going to always be walking into safe situations where you feel confident that they're going to do their job well, and they don't need to be worried about other things. And so one of the questions that I posed to this gentleman who you meet in the film is, I said, why would you do this? Why would you go on camera with the risks that are there to speak to us about this? And he said, this isn't who I wanted to be. This isn't what I imagined for myself. And then he explained to me in detail that he became a poacher because he was the son of a single mother who had cancer. The nearest place for her to get chemotherapy was 3 hours away, one-way drive, so 6 hours of travel time. And the only thing that was available in his community to do to make that kind of money, he thought, was to engage in Totoaba poaching. And so you learn in this clip, which you're about to see, that he took out a loan and he bought some nets, and within a month those nets were pulled up by Sea Shepherd doing their job, and now he owed many tens of thousands of dollars to very dangerous people. And there was only one way of getting out of that pickle and still affording treatment for his mom, and that was to take another loan and to buy more nets. And I think that experience of seeing how people feel trapped into a cycle where they don't feel like they have other economic options for a successful life fundamentally shifted how we thought about the campaign moving forward. And it became less about prosecuting poachers, despite the fact that is certainly important, and we did do that in the campaign. But we realized that we couldn't address this issue without addressing the need for socio-political change in this region and investment in alternative livelihoods. And so here's the clip of us meeting JT.
As an outsider, it is nearly impossible to infiltrate the Totoaba cartel. But sometimes you find that one person that is willing to talk.
En el tiempo que has trabajado de noche, ¿cuánto dinero has ganado? Tengo idea.
¿Mucho?
Pues sí, pero así como te da dinero te quita, pues sí me entiendes. Ahorita las leyes mexicanas, por decir, saben que Lalo agarró $40,000. La mitad de tu casa trae $30,000 por ahí.
How many nets you have right now in the water?
Mierda, ya me quitaron todo.
Ni una?
No. En la presencia de Sea Shepherd, ¿te dificulta tu trabajo o te da igual que esté Sea Shepherd? Sí, Sea Shepherd me quitaron esto.
It's a big loss.
At 3,000 net, that's $54,000.
Exactly. It's a lot of money.
Who is paying for all these nets? I mean, he cannot pay for all these nets. Like there is hundreds of thousands of dollars of nets right now, right? Who is paying?
¿Quién paga? ¿Cómo se costean las redes?
Puede haber alguien que te preste.
There is someone to loan the money.
So it's still a loan. So I give you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious now if they lost, if you lose $56,000 in nets,
Then you have
you
to pay
still
for
own the money to these
all the
people.
money, of course.
Boy, the single word that comes to my mind is empathy. It builds empathy for what could, as you said earlier, could have been painted as, oh, the villains, you know, the villains of the film. Instead, you add a complexity and take us into that world in a way that is rare. And we learn really what happened behind the scenes that led this person to start poaching. And I just felt such tremendous empathy, you know.
Yeah.
It's very powerful.
Yeah, I'll share another clip with you, which I think kind of really puts a pin in this. And it's a key moment where we had the opportunity to interview the person who was supposed to be, you know, most in charge of ensuring that this doesn't happen, that no one gets forced into this kind of a situation. You don't have to choose between poverty and poaching. And that was an interview that the lead journalist in this film, Carlos Loret de Mola, did with the admiral of the Mexican Navy who was stationed, you know, in Baja, in Ensenada. And so we took a trip over to Ensenada one day to film, you know, Carlos asking just smart, simple journalistic questions of the person who was at the top of the decision-making, you know, kind of pyramid for enforcing these laws. And I think what you'll see very clearly in the clip is that there's a tremendous amount of waffling that takes place, and it starts to really paint the picture and bring home, I think, for the audience, and then help us, you know, kind of continue out through the campaign, the idea that these people are very much on their own. They're having to make decisions about how to support themselves, and they may not always be making what we think are the right decisions, but you can see very clearly in this clip that there's no one backing them up. They're having to make these decisions alone. So here's the clip with Carlos and the Admiral.
Admiral Rommel Ledesma is the one that is in charge of the law enforcement in the area. Federal police, the army, the Navy, all the law enforcement areas of the Mexican government come together in the desk and the decisions of Admiral Ledesma. ¿Quién es el Chapo de la Totoaba?
Pues hay de familias conocidas, de Aispuro, de, en fin, que conocemos de datos, ¿no?
¿Le dice algo el nombre Oscar Parra Aispuro?
Sí, son familias, digo, personajes conocidos ahí en el área, ¿no?
Pero él es el jefe.
Pues yo no lo puedo afirmar que sea el jefe, ¿no? Pero son personajes ampliamente conocidos ahí en la comunidad.
Pero veo que tiene ya el organigrama.
Sí.
¿Ya lo tienen mapeado?
Sí, está mapeado.
Almirante, ¿por qué si ya saben quién es, ya saben dónde vive, no está, por qué no lo han agarrado?
Bueno, están repito, las instancias de seguridad pública.
Corrupción. A ver, es imposible que todo eso esté pasando y resulta que nadie se da cuenta.
Bueno, pues quizá algunas autoridades pues hacen como que no ven, ¿no? Trabajo. Ahora, realmente esto ha disminuido en cantidad importante.
Ahora, ¿esto qué quiere decir?
Que está disminuyendo. O sea, yo siento...
No pueden decirles, es que son menos eficaces.
No, de ninguna manera.
¿Van tras él?
Tras todo, contra todos. Todo el infractor.
¿Y están cerca?
All I want is to put pressure on the authorities and try to make things happen. As a journalist, that's as far as you can go, but it's a lot. So if I meet with an admiral, if I meet with a commissioner, if I meet with a minister, and I ask him about the thing, they know we're watching. And if they come out with a promise, they better keep it.
So that, again, a really powerful clip. And what caught me when I was watching the film for the first time was that this admiral just painted himself into a corner. I mean, you really didn't need to get, you know, aggressive in the questioning or, you know, or try to, you know, trick the admiral into saying something that maybe revealed more. I mean, he just was very forthcoming. And wow, I mean, it does paint that picture of just how much the people in the film, in the villages, are on their own and without options. One of the elements of your campaign is to really have a tremendous effect on policy. So if you can explain a little bit more, just connecting the dots between, so here's the film, how does that translate into trying to achieve policy change?
Yeah, one of the things that I think that, you know, obviously we made this film and then I was really privileged to get to stay on with National Geographic, you know, as the impact producer running the campaign. One of the things that National Geographic did, which I thought was just absolutely phenomenal, is that they really full-heartedly supported making sure that this film led to action, even if it wasn't always directly related to the characters that you see in the film. Some of the most important work, and certainly some of the work that I'm most proud of with the campaign that happened, was when we had the opportunity to take this film to policymakers in Mexico. Both in Baja, there was a new governor that came in during the course of the campaign. There was also a new US ambassador to Mexico that came in during the course of the campaign. And we were able to host some really key events, both at the Senate, on the Senate floor of Mexico City, as well as with key media outlets in Mexico City. What I thought was particularly important to kind of close this loop from an impact strategy standpoint is that National Geographic supported not only having the film production team there, myself and Richard Laicani and other key characters from the film like Dr. Cynthia Smith and Andrea Crosta, and you know, we had Jack Hutton from Sea Shepherd, but they also financed having, you know, the two rural fishermen who you get to know in the film, you know, Javier and Alan Valverde, but importantly, and this is so important, they also financed taking the key local decision makers who you never meet in the film. These are not people that National Geographic had to trot around from a media standpoint. This was purely them supporting the film doing good work in the world. And so we were able to take some of the leaders of the key fishing co-ops in San Felipe, as well as El Golfo de Santa Clara, which is one of the other communities that we visit in the film. And you know, these were people who had a tremendous amount of influence over the local fishing co-ops and the way those are run and the perspective that people have. And the fact that, and I'll get to the point of like why this is so important from an impact standpoint. Not only did it give these local fishermen the opportunity to speak directly for the first time to their policymakers in Mexico City, there's also a secondary benefit, which is almost more important. It was a bit of kind of on our part, admittedly, a bit of social engineering, but what it really did is it shifted the perception of power within these communities. What you had in these communities previously is you had these, like, you know, fishing co-op leaders who were not perceived as actually having very much reach, not perceived as actually having very much power. And so the cartel folks who are in these community are then perceived as actually being the people who can do something, as opposed to your local co-op leader who's maybe advocating for you to use, you know, sustainable fishing gear and sustainable fishing methods. By having the campaign not only go to Mexico City, go to the Senate, reach out to international news outlets so that this is being covered differently in Mexico, and focusing, you know, the national news in Mexico started focusing on the need for investment in alternative livelihoods versus a narrative of like poachers are evil and the government is failing to prosecute it. We were able to shift the power dynamic toward these local fishing representatives who you might have not been paying as much attention to. They're the people who have the power. They're the people who you see Facebook photos with, standing with your senator, appearing on Bloomberg News. You know, you started shifting, and where as an impact producer, I felt like we had absolutely succeeded in that bit of engineering, is that one of the kind of locally famous, you know, cartel related members, a gentleman named Sunshine Rodriguez, who's kind of infamous in the area. After this started to happen, he's quite notorious for doing lengthy Facebook Live posts. He actually went live with a message about how we all needed to be working together to, you know, switch towards sustainable fishing practices and working with our local governments. And for me, that was a real confirmation that that shift in power was being recognized on the ground. And these people were starting to say, crap, those guys are talking to their senators and policies happening, and I better change my narrative a little bit so that I also stay in power.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, it's such a different way of and such a clear-cut success story, because sometimes it's so hard to measure what impact occurs. You know, you hope for this, and how do you track it and how do you measure it? That's a big question for all of us. But this is very clear-cut, you know, and it makes me think that, you know, over time, you have a really clear way of understanding the impact that the film has had. Do you intend to follow up over time, a year, 2 years, 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the single thing that I'm most thinking about anytime we craft an impact strategy is, how do we make sure that the momentum and, you know, all the money and the marketing and the buzz and the people interest that goes into a phenomenal film, how do we make sure that that rolls over to the frontline heroes who have been working on this, whatever issue your film is about, you know, for the last decade and for the next decade, so that long after the rest of us have moved on to other exciting projects and we're in different parts of the world telling different stories, how can we be sure that this project continues to do good work that matters to the people on the ground? Some of the most satisfying things for me are to get messages, you know, months later. I'm busy working on other impact campaigns now, and this one has kind of wound down. But you know, or the end of last month, you know, I got a message from a contact in the Mexican Congress who said they just passed it, and I was like, passed what? And she said they passed a reform to the penal code in Mexico, making it a much more serious, you know, federal level kind of you know, felony to engage in Totoaba poaching, and it now comes along with mandatory prison sentence, whereas before you would just kind of get a slap on the wrist and nothing happened. And along with that, the kind of second thing I'm most proud of is that one of the senators we worked with, he has, like right now, he has filed some sort of amendment legislation, which if it passes, it's passed the Senate, and we're waiting for it to be approved by the Congress in Mexico. Is to say that this has to come along with mandatory investment in alternative livelihoods for fishermen. And so I think, you know, oftentimes, I'll be honest, it's not unusual. The things that you're most privileged and excited to hear about often come, you know, a year, 2 years, even 3 years after you've finished a campaign. But it always does so much to kind of, you know, reignite my sense of purpose around why I love doing this work. And really, I think it also helps us make a case, you know, to future projects and funders as to, like, listen, this is a gift which keeps on giving, and that might matter to some of your investors or some of your funders, or to your core mission.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the idea of making a film in a vacuum anymore just seems, I mean, I've made a lot of films in my lifetime, but, and I think the idea that you have to have a sense of what the film can do. I mean, we're in such a critical place on our planet, right? And so there's not really a lot of time to just make a film in a vacuum. I don't know, I'm not saying that well, but you know,
Well,
I do think
especially
that
in the natural history, I think, you know, it's especially in the natural history, you know, world. I think most of us are watching the amazing places that we've had the opportunity to travel to and to shoot in look very different from the last time we were there. And so I think it's an incredibly kind of important moment in history for us to think about, like, what is the work that we're doing. This is a very nerdy research fact, but I'll just share, you know, one of the things that kind of helped move me into this space was some research that I read that said that most people who are not scientists make their decisions about what they know about science, how confident they feel about the natural world, based on media that they see, and not just any media, but specifically like popular media that's on television. And so, you know, the television shows, the natural history documentaries that we're watching for entertainment, that has the most impact on what we think about the natural world and the state of the natural world and our role in it. And so, you know, being an entertainer is important, otherwise no one would watch the films. But, you know, whether you like it or not, you're also an educator. You're having a huge influence on what people think about the natural world. And you can either decide to wield that for a better future, you know, or not. And my hope is that I think more and more we're seeing that people want to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many opportunities today too, you know, I mean, all the different media platforms, the opportunity to build out over social media and, you know, to really keep that film project alive and its impact alive for quite a long time. And, you know, the other thing that I really appreciated about Sea of Shadows is, you know, we talk a lot about voice and what voice it used to be, what we're giving somebody a voice, but it really is about amplifying voices. And I think Sea of Shadows did that so effectively that, it was not, again, this, kind of classic trope of the heroes and the villains, but it amplified voices at multiple layers, and then the Impact campaign followed through on that, and really effectively. So we've talked about the policy. What other areas of impact? And I'd like to come back even to the Vaquita, where you started. Where is the Impact campaign going around the Vaquita?
Sure. Most folks may not know, if you haven't kind of continued, that a lot of work has continued in that arena. Just to answer basic questions, the Vaquita is not extinct yet. Last fall, there were 2 mothers with calves, and they were independently, I guess the science of it being is that they believe that it was 2 different mothers with 2 different, calves, which is incredibly heartening. That being said, I won't pretend that the situation isn't dire. It absolutely is. But good work is continuing. Sea Shepherd continues to operate. In fact, they've increased their capacity in recent months around the Sea of Cortez. National Marine Mammal Foundation continues their amazing work. And there's also a very important Mexican-based NGO who you don't meet in the film, but I'll mention because they were so important, called Museo de la Ballena. And one of the things that they do is they actually employ local fishermen to work on behalf of the National Marine Mammal Foundation, as well as NOAA's Southwest Fisheries Science Center, to actually be the caretakers of acoustic monitoring devices, which help us understand where and how many vaquita are remaining, in the Gillnet exclusion zone, this very critical zone of the Sea of Cortez. And so that work is all continuing, and nothing makes me happier than to hear that the film is helping drive audiences to support those organizations. No matter what you're interested in, whether it's the investigative side with Andrea Crosta, or the very science and conservation side of frontline work with the National Marine Mammal Foundation, or it's the really, advocacy and direct action approach that Sea Shepherd takes. There are so many amazing organizations working in this space. There's really something for anyone, no matter what inspires you. There's a great organization that's doing frontline work in this space. They're in the film. You can learn about what they do, and they desperately need your support.
Yeah, really a great alliance building there. I mean, just again, so many different layers. It's so impressive.
So there's a last clip that I would love to share with you, and I think kind of pulls together all the things that we've spoken about. Maggie, you brought up the importance of elevating local voices, and both the film and the campaign tried really hard to make that central to our whole ethos. How we approached this entire project was, how are we elevating the voices who are going to need support in this long after we've all moved on. And I think that there was an emotional scene in the film in which the grandfather and grandson, Alan and Javier Valverde, who you get to know through the film, they've driven 200 miles south of where they live to try and get to a place where it's legal for them to fish, because they're just that committed to wanting to do things in the right way. And as many generations of fishermen, they think of themselves as stewards of the ocean. They don't want to do things in a negative way. They want to live in harmony with the sea. It's what they've been doing for as long as they can remember, but it's getting harder and harder for them. And there's a great soundbite from Alan Valverde in the film in which he says, we want to be the people who saved the Vaquita, but we really need help too. And so you can see that here.
¿De dónde sacábamos dinero? No nos vamos a rendir. Entonces, tenemos que irnos 200 kilómetros para el sur para poder pescar legal. Es una locura, la verdad. Y sabemos que va a continuar. Ya no tenemos la certeza cuántos años más nos dejen entrar el mar a nosotros, los legales. Que sepan que no somos monstruos en San Felipe. Nosotros necesitamos que también nos den opciones. Que nos den opciones a nosotros y que nos escuchen, pues. queremos ser el pueblo que rescató a la vaquita de la extinción. Pero necesitamos apoyo de esto también.
So just a couple more questions. One of the things that you mentioned in the materials for the Impact campaign is following a model along the lines of theory of change. And that's been something I've been thinking a lot about doing this research over the summer on for our new Impact Media report. If you can explain, using Sea of Shadows as an example, how did you apply the theory of change framework?
Sure. So I should have had the case study right in front of me. We actually had 3 different kind of theories of change that we developed. But to kind of explain it in a broad, for those of us who maybe not as academically framed, you know, first off, I guess I'll just say I think theories of change are really important. I think logic models are really important. They're not sexy. I get it. You know, if you're a producer who's watching this and you're like, oh God, please don't talk to me about theories of change. We don't need to, but they're really important in our industry for the work that we do. And I think that really gets at the fact that if there was one message that I would maybe try and communicate to people, it's that strategic impact is a craft. It is an area of academic expertise. Some of us have spent a lot of time, you know, really studying how to think about these, you know, how narrative leads to behavior change and trust building and all those sorts of things that you want good impact campaigns to achieve. And the theories of change are how we map that out in the beginning so that we can kind of make decisions about where are my presumptions, what are the weaknesses in my argument, and it gives an opportunity for other people to say, I don't agree that this leads to this, and that's kind of the purpose of the theory of change. You know, with Sea of Shadows, we built you know, theories of change around a few different kind of verticals, I'll say, of activation. Obviously, the story was an incredibly important one, and I think you really do have to think about, you know, this is what we want the film to achieve. Let's work backwards to make sure that we have characters like JT, we have characters like Alan and Javier Valverde who are going to help us get to that end goal of feeling like you as a viewer have a very thorough understanding of you know, the situation on the ground, a complex web. It's not, we don't have archetypes, we have multi-layered characters that you really resonate with. So that was one vertical. And then the others that we sort of built specific theories of change around were the top-down approach. So sort of thinking like, okay, from a policymaker perspective, what are the things, you know, that we could maybe achieve? Who are the key stakeholders that are going to be relevant to getting us there? And what do we have to do both in the film as well as the campaign around that film to successfully engage them in caring? And that might be like finding champions who are among policymakers. You know, we worked very closely with Senator Marat in Mexico, who really cared about this issue, and he became a valuable ally to get us there. But we also did other things that sort of made other politicians look bad if they didn't get on board with it. And so, you know, that was built into the theory of change, was like, what are the strategies to make sure you kind of feel obligated, you know, to advance this issue? So that top-down approach. We very strategically built a theory of change around the grassroots initiatives and the bottom-up approach, and that was how are we empowering NGOs to be part of this campaign, to really carry the work forward when we're done. And again, working backwards, what does that look like at each stage of the campaign? What does that look like in terms of media rollout and our marketing strategy that we build with National Geographic? What does that look like in the film and who we choose to have on camera? And then the last one is really in service to all the others. And that's sort of the public activation vertical. That's how do you utilize social and digital assets and the amazing opportunities that we have at our fingertips. There is so much incredible technology now that helps you get exactly the right message in front of exactly the right people. There's loads of research underwriting how you know you're targeting the right audience. And I think having a strategy that is specific to how do we utilize those channels to support all of the others, you know, that top down and that bottom up sort of approach. And so we had very specific kind of strategies within all of those verticals and tried to make sure that they all played together nicely.
You make it sound really exciting. I know theory of change can sound a little dry, but you know, I mean, any filmmaker, you think about how you cast your characters, who you're going to cast, you know, what's the narrative build, you know, all those different elements that really make a successful, entertaining film, but also are very strategic in the impact it's going to have when people watch it. You know, I so wish that we were just in getting coffee at Jackson Hole, talking about this in person, having those conversations in the hallways, just brainstorming around all the different ways that we can have impact. So I would love to hear from you. I'm just like trying to picture just hanging out over a nice cold beer. I'd love to, I'd love to hear from you. What advice do you have? Where do you think we're going? I think there's so many new interesting models for how to have impact, so, I mean, just in those kind of casual conversations, where do you see things going from here?
Yeah, I think that's an amazing question. I guess the main thing I would say is that impact can mean really different things to different people. I think that's both one of the challenges, because when you say someone does impact, it can, at the moment within our industry, it can mean almost anything. It can be very academic based, the way that my approach is, or it can be very, social media and kind of publicity and marketing oriented. And I guess what I'd say is that none of those are wrong. But I guess my advice would be to know what you want and have conversations with kind of impact, whether it's somebody who is an impact producer, or with your production team, about what is it you really want to achieve, and then what do you need to get there? Because I think, that can help guide you towards, I think, what the right kind of impact partner is, for your particular project. And I guess I would also just say that I loved working on Sea of Shadows. It was the opportunity. It was sort of an amazing opportunity to kind of we had carte blanche. It was like, do what you want with the campaign, as long as it resonates with, what Terramana's vision was and what National Geographic wants to achieve. We had a lot of leeway, and that was an enormous gift, and I think made us more successful. But I guess I would just say, you don't have to have National Geographic's budget to have amazing impact if you start up from the beginning, knowing the job you want your film to do in the world, and then just think backwards, go back from there and say, okay, well, who are the people that can help make that happen? Is it the public? Is it policymakers? Is it this particular country or brand or company or influencer? And then what's the story that engages them? And I think if you're thinking about your stories in that way, then you're already halfway there to having an impact strategy. We just tend to be the people who kind of like pick up the ball while you're busy making a film, and we keep running with that particular thread.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you're saying it doesn't always have to be some huge budget to make it happen. I mean, I've seen plenty of examples where it's a very small team, but they're thinking strategically, they're thinking ahead. They have a kind of a visionary change model in their minds that dovetails with the entertainment model, and that goes so far. It's really, I think of it as all of us are responsible at this point for making films that can make a difference. And having these kind of conversations and case studies is a great way of sharing how we can do that, and brainstorming and, moving it forward. There's so many different opportunities today to do this, and we so desperately need to be thinking in this way.
Absolutely. COVID's been hard on all of us. We're all, I'm just as guilty of dying to, well, I was about to say get on an airplane, which makes me look very bad. I know we shouldn't be thinking about that, but I think like many filmmakers, I'm just as guilty of like desperately wanting to get to go someplace exciting and make a film. But, I think if there's one really positive outcome, it's that, you have a captive audience, everyone's on their phones, they're all at home. It is an opportunity for us to be reaching as many people as possible with important stories.
Absolutely. Any last words of advice or last thoughts?
Yeah, impact starts in pre-production. Please, even if you don't have a budget, still email me. I'm happy to talk to you.
That's so great. It's so important. It's so important. It's really, I just think of it as 21st century filmmaking. It's really the future. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure to virtually have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
And hopefully this time next year we'll be going to Jackson Hole in person.
I'll take you up on that beer.
Conversations.
Absolutely.
My treat. Okay. Ruth, thank you so much.